There we go. All right, so yes, this is being recorded. I just wanted to make sure that that was that happened. Shoot, where was I? Sorry. Oh, anyway, so we'll I'm sure we have students. I'm sure we have people who are already in consulting, people who are looking at consulting, and some people who are just curious to know what consulting is about and just want to learn. And so we'll try to address as much of this as possible. Again, I'm here really to moderate and facilitate and just answer questions about the guidebook. So that said, can everybody see the guidebook? I see nodding heads. So, okay, great. So hopefully you've had a chance to look through the guidebook. In fact, one of the kind of prerequisites for actually actively participating in this session is to have read the guidebook. And so I'll open up by just kind of taking any questions you might have about the contents of the guidebook itself, or even the process behind it, etc. I want to make sure that the people who worked on this, everybody who worked on it, gets proper credit. You can see the names listed here: David Bristol, Neil Foltz, Aaron Greco, Irina, Mitch, Olu, Stefan, Alicia, and I was just I had the privilege of coordinating them. So anyways, that said, any questions, or I'll just kind of open up the floor. Any questions about the guidebook itself and some of the processes, and then we can kind of take it from there. Right, no burning questions.
I don't have any questions, but I don't know if it'll help prime the pump if I just say first, thank you to you and the committee for doing this. I did have a chance to read through it, and I had nothing to do with putting it together, although I probably should have volunteered my time. But I just wanted to say that as a private consultant, I've been doing this for like 6 years. This is great. I saw a lot of things that I thought this is exactly the conclusion I came to, kind of on my own and painfully in some cases, rather than having something like this to support me and like warn me about some of these issues. And there are definitely some things in it that I haven't had to consider yet, but might in the future. And I feel like this is a really great source of think about this. Like, I think that's exactly what this document is great at. So thank you for putting this all together.
Thanks, Kim. And to kind of add to that point, I mean, this was not meant to be nice. It's just by chance I have this up here, but this is not to be like, it's not meant to be legal advice. It's not meant to be contractual advice, accounting or tax, any of that stuff, right? But it's really a list of things where, for us to think through, and the answers are going to be different, right? For every for every situation and for every practice, because we all consult on different things and we have different clients and different situations and so forth. And so from that perspective, these are really just, okay, at least, make sure that you have at least thought about these things.
I think one of the best things this document does too is there's a lot of places where it says, talk to somebody who knows about this, talk to a lawyer, talk to an accountant, make sure that you understand the issues in your specific area. And I think that's one of those things that sometimes people say, I don't need to do that, I'm just getting started, but that's going to be one of the most important things to help you get started right. So I think that is exactly the strength of this document, is what you just said, is recognizing that situations are different, and here's where you should go to find out what that situation is like for you. So yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Anyone have got anything to add or question or any specific things that you want to see, talk about, etc.?
Sure.
Let's see, I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about the decision of hourly consulting versus project-based consulting, and the decision-making process of
Mhm.
which way to go. Personally, I'm just starting a private consulting business,
Mhm.
and I'm leaning towards project-based consulting.
Mhm.
But I do find that it it adds a little bit of stress, not so much in the sense of whether I'm gonna overwork it, but sometimes just in the planning of the project, knowing that there's going to be a lot of work, but not being able to actually describe what that's going to be. So,
Mhm.
when I put together a statistical plan, um, you know, a lot of stuff gets put on it, but I know in reality, those things aren't going to take all that much time. That what's going to take the time is the unknowns that come in.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so it's just like this sort of, in a way, this a bit of a feeling of like, oh, I'm overcharging for the plan as it is, but I know that probably it's going to end up taking the time anyway.
Yes, that was something that we went back and forth quite a bit, right? And so, for whatever it's worth, I think some of the group that put this together, some of us are more project based, and others are more hourly based. And the I think kind of traditional, independent consulting, has been a little bit more, hourly based and so forth. But then there are different viewpoints, and basically what it comes down to, and there's some points in here that sort of in the guidebook that points to that, but it's really just kind of it goes beyond what the business model is, right? It goes beyond whether the question, do I charge by hourly or do I charge by project because it's convenient for me, or et cetera, et cetera. There are more kind of like value and other sort of business decisions that go into it. And so some of the things that have come up are like, there is an inherent sort of implication that the hourly, if you charge by the hour, you're charging for your time, right? And so the thing being that if you're say that your rate is, let's say, I'm just going to make it up, $150 an hour, then you're saying that, okay, all of your hours are equally $150, worth $150. Whereas some might be more, some might be less, number one. And then you get into the kind of question of, well, how do you value that hour, right? How do you, what is how do you decide what the value of that hour is? Because then if you're saying that, well, 150 and, one day is not the same thing as 150 doing something else, then, well, then you're saying that you're admitting that you have a value, difference in value, but then how do you, value that? So that's kind of one side of things, right? As when it comes to the hourly. And the other thing that we discuss quite a bit is, and this kind of interjects a little bit of my personal opinion, but the hourly rate, when you think about hourly rate, just look around, right? Who do you pay hourly rate to? Just in everyday life. Like, your people who do stuff for you, right? So like, think of like car mechanics. You pay them by the hour. Essentially, it's labor, right? Hourly rate, charging by hourly rate from a business perspective, you're saying that we're charging you for labor and not necessarily for expertise, not necessarily, well, expertise in it, which is built into the labor. But so then it depends on what it is that you're selling, right? If you're selling statistical labor, so to speak, that's, it's a perfect model, right? If you're selling, if you're selling, or if you were providing some other service, then you kind of have to figure out what that is. The project-based pricing gets really tricky. I mean, it sort of gets around it from a conceptual perspective, because you're saying that, okay, the value of the project is this. But then that also sort of requires you to think through really what is in the project. You have to be able to like come up with really, really tight definition of that project, because it's really easy to go up under, overcharging for not enough work isn't really, I think that's less of a problem than, you actually end up doing a lot more work than you signed up for. And so you'd have to really, really tighten up your, what it is that you're going to do. And I, hear a lot about, well, you're going to, run into a situation, well, we can't really scope up the entire project because we don't know what's going to come and so forth. Putting on my personal hat, not the group hat, I would say in that particular case, break up the project. Do a smaller project to define a bigger project. That's always been my go-to personally. And it's a model that it's worked quite well in some of the other scenarios. So break up the project as much as possible. I isolate the unknowns from the knowns, and then do it that way so that you can actually scope the part that is really, really important. Because typically what happens is, like, if you spend if you spend a short amount of time trying, then you can actually scope it out, but then scope out the whole project, right? So if you spend 10% of the time in a small project and to scope up 90% of the time, 90% of the project, then you can actually do it, and then you can do it well. But then part of the problem is that we're trying to do 100% from the very beginning without being able to carve out that 10 versus the 90. So that's my personal hat. Now I'm take the hat and put the different hat on, the group hat. But those were some of the discussions that have come up in the putting together of this document. So thank you for that question. It's a question that the pricing and the chart, the invoicing model, not invoicing model, but the billing model is something that comes up quite a bit. So.
Yeah, thank you.
There is a comment in here, and I'm just going to read off. It is funny that our clients do this all the time. A good recommendation to seek expert help. It is funny that our clients do this all the time, but they don't think, they need a statistical consultant when they do, and now the tables are turned. And that is one of the things I think we also have to be, we have to be mindful of that. A lot of times we're going to say, hey, I can do it. I don't need to pay anybody else to do it for something that could actually have quite a bit of risk. And so we, want to recognize, as well as statisticians, that, hey, we want them to pay us when it comes to statistical stuff. So it's, the other side holds true as well. We want to make sure that we are enlisting the right people who are actually experts at the stuff that we need. So, and that is, it's such a great thing to, keep in mind, again, so that we don't kind of fall into the trap of, because running a business, and here's another thing that came out quite a bit in the discussion, is that running a business is a business, right? It's like, we're statisticians, and it takes a lot more than simply saying that, okay, I can offer my service as a statistician to whoever wants to pay me to do it. But it goes a lot more than that, right? So there's a lot more that's involved in actually running the running a business. And we've talked quite a bit about, okay, what is the overhead? If you had your own business, what is a typical overhead of actually doing, statistical work that you sort of, quote unquote, get paid for, versus the other aspects of the business. And I think it's sort of ranged quite a bit, but at no point, I think we said that we would, well, the consensus more or less was that, the most you would actually have billable hours was somewhere between 60 to 70%. And so, in my personal experience has been, again, it can be as the billable hours can be as low as 50 to 40. So, I mean, which then sort of tells you you need to account for, as you figure out how much to bill, you kind of have to, keep that in mind. But anyways, Soumya.
Hi, Michiko.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for doing this. Even though my consulting is not like yours, I have a question. I mean, I know that there's been a lot of discussion by email, people asking who they can go to for insurance or for lawyers and stuff like that. So it would be good to have like a list of people that are available who have done this work before, because not every lawyer is going to be aware of the kind of consulting we do, or the kind of insurance we need. And also, I mean, my consulting, of course, is individual. So my CPA said, you're not making enough to worry about setting up as a company. So I don't know what other people how other people feel about it. But it would be nice to have a repository of people that we can go to if necessary.
Even for like the attorneys and insurance companies and so forth. The one thing I would the one thing I would caution against is they change all the time. I mean, there's there's a lot that change, and also I'm not in a position to answer any whether it's appropriate to have a sort of like a vetted list or that, but that's sort of separate. But again, putting my sort of own hat on, right? I found my attorney through personal contacts who are not even statisticians. I just happen to know some people who are lawyers, and I sort of asked around, this is what I'm looking for, here's my business and what I'm going to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I happen to end up with a great lawyer who is an IP-based attorney, an intellectual property-based attorney.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. Like, so, but if someone else comes to you, you can say, I use this person, maybe that will work for you. But for everyone to try to invent that wheel all the time, at least get a starting point.
And it's something like, attorney is going to vary by state, right? So I mean, there's a lot of variables, and whether that's about good resource or not, it's going to be a different story. And then once I found an attorney, they are the ones who told me about where I can go to get insurance. So if you have an accountant, I would say, like, ask your accountant. If you have a lawyer, ask your lawyer and sort of fan out from there, as opposed to trying to look for it on your own, because they will understand. They have dealt with you. Once you find a good one that you work with, they have dealt with you and they know, and they will understand. They'll start to understand what it is that you do and use them as a resource. I mean, you pay them to do some things, right? So that's sort of what I say. And I mean, there are lots of national resources, like like national insurers and so forth. But for me personally, I ended up with my insurance, commercial insurance broker through my attorney. I know that the whole question of insurance keeps coming up, from time to time, and there's been some discussion about E&O insurance as well, which is, I think, different, obviously different from getting personal insurance.
Machiko, I had a question for you.
Sure.
Since you have your own business, I was wondering what the ebbs and flows of the business looks like throughout the year. And like, I'm not sure if you do write proposals, or if all your customers are from word of mouth, or from a website, or how you get your customers. But I didn't know if you could describe a little bit about like how you manage projects starting and ending, and I think you touched a little bit on that in the guidebook, but if you could just expand on that.
Yeah. So I'll kind of represent the group's opinion on this a little bit, or group's experience on this, because my practice is a little bit different from most other practices. In a sense that I don't actually do statistical consulting, but about consulting about statistics and data. So, but that said, the overwhelming sort of feedback, or the opinion of the group, was that you're going to have weeks where you are actually, going to be super busy. I mean, the ebbs and flows are like, you could have like be really, really busy for some period of time, and then you have weeks where you have nothing, right? And so then there are other sort of ways to look at it. It's like, hey, about the time you're about to finish your current project, maybe you should be already sort of looking to sign on another project, et cetera, et cetera. But then that also depends on whether all your projects are full-time or part-time, right? And then if you're doing it project-based, then are your projects really, that do you really actually spend 30 let's say 30 hours a week working on a project? And is that the only project that you work on during that time, or do you have multiple projects? And so that will depend on the type of work you do and the type of the clients that you work with. And so interesting, we had, it was interesting that this group that, that put this together, we came from a lot of different sort of backgrounds, and one actually ran a consulting practice with a whole bunch of people, and one it still does, is an independent consultant, but working in a larger scenario. A couple of them are independent consultants like myself, and but then the type of the work that you do will in part kind of feed into how that will work. Because I mean, if you're doing a whole bunch of part-time work that are staggered, then that's a different story. If you tend to do more of a full-time work in a project, and then the contract ends, you have to go look for something else, then that's a slightly different dynamic. Well, that's a very different dynamic, not just slightly.
Okay.
I don't know if that, I'm not, I don't know if that particularly answers the question, but at least sort of like the thought process behind it.
Right. Yeah.
And some of us have, in terms of like, okay, how busy can you possibly get? Well, yeah, you get, it is possible to have a, what is essentially a good problem to have, which is, you got way too much work for a very short period of time. And some of us have, yes, that will actually work like 80 hours a week, right? Just to get past those, hard times, but, or even, close to 100. But then you get some other times where you don't, there are no paid projects per se. And you're either working on getting new projects or working on catching up on other non-project things that you still need to do. And so it's just a matter of how you sort of budget. Planning, you can actually plan at least to an extent, so that you're not like completely dead by the time the whole thing is done. But it's that you can plan a little bit, but understanding ahead of time what's going to happen, and having that sort of thinking ahead on ahead what your current project ahead of your current project is kind of important, because then that's, if you're not thinking far enough, then what I would call a sales cycle for our work. So basically, by the time from the time you identify a prospect and an opportunity until you actually close the opportunity is can be pretty long. Sometimes if it's if the client comes to you sort of like really with a really urgent need, sometimes that's not the case. But then if it's really just kind of a day-to-day business as usual type and business development, then the sales cycle can take a good amount of time. I mean, it's not like you can go to somebody and say, hey, I can offer the service to you, and they say, okay, great, we'll pay you today. It doesn't happen like that, right? And so then, a lot of it is, how do you build that, relationship getting up to the closing the sale, so to speak. And so you have to at least keep in mind that can take a long time. Some people, depending on type of the work, do it in a couple weeks. And then on the other extreme, my sales cycles, typically 12 to 24 months.
Okay, that would be provide a lot more stability, I guess, for a private practice if you had work that lasted longer. Okay, thanks.
So I have another question regarding kind of building up business or developing awareness and marketing. So it seems like there's some consensus that, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, that the primary source of business is word of mouth. And I'm wondering about, just curious about kind of getting into other markets, or if you want to stimulate things to go faster than just the word of mouth. I don't think saw anything about, attending conferences in the domain, like the specific domain area that you're interested in working, or getting face to face with people that are in that area. And I'm just trying to get a sense, is that a good road, or is that known or unknown?
And by the way, I'd also kind of open up to other people to chime in, because I mean, we're here. There are a whole bunch of us who are here, I think, who have some experience in business development. And so please do chime in, and I'll sort of offer my perspective and the perspective of the group. But at the end of the day, so if we have to tier, sort of business development, right? The likelihood of success in terms of business development, it's the word of mouth, basically, the people or somehow networking and so forth. And so that's sort of, because and then the next one is like, you sort of proactively go out, and it's a proactive sort of outreach, right? And then the last one is reactive outreach of some sort. Reactive outreach that doesn't make sense, but anyways, you see what I'm saying. And at the bottom of all this, right? The fundamental part is that to be successful, you have to have a relationship somewhere with a client, a current client, prospective client, et cetera. And that relationship could be direct, indirect, et cetera. But it's that part that takes the longest to build from a consulting perspective. It is a business development. It's not, it's not like, here, it's different from like, opening up a tent somewhere in a fair and say, here's, my stuff, come buy it, right? It's a little bit different. We hate to, because what we offer is, as a service, is a kind of professional service. We there's the big kind of trust component and big relationship component that it's required for them to buy your service, because at the end of the day, it's like, well, why you and not somebody else, right? Well, you trust that person more, or you've heard better things, you've heard good things about them. Versus, I mean, if you kind of plot the known versus the unknown, people are always going to gravitate towards the known. And so then, and known and good known, right? And so then how do you make that happen? And for that reason, word of mouth is by far the fastest, right? Fastest and most reliable in terms of business development. Now, the going out to conferences and kind of reaching out to your network and beyond your network and so forth. I mean, that takes time. That takes longer time, and I'll sort of say that for me, for my own practice, that is where a good part of the 12 to 24 month sales cycle comes from. And so just to get a little bit on a personal side, so because of the effects of the COVID from last year, I've had to kind of rebuild my own business, and I'm starting to see fruit right now of what I started about 18 months ago. In terms of kind of repositioning and doing business development and so forth. And so again, I'm on a very soft end of things, and so softer things tend to take longer than harder things. But that said, there's a lot of kind of the softness that's required in order to business develop. Yeah, if you're doing that, my personal take on it is, if you're doing, if you want to get into a adjacency or different industry or whatever, find somebody in that industry and make a relationship there and kind of fan out from there, as opposed to just kind of going out to and kind of trying it out. It's like that said, a lot of the things that we talked about was like, yeah, we could, it's okay to invest in marketing as long as it's fairly contained. And you can try things out. Like I personally tried out some Facebook ads, right? I personally tried out this, that, and the other thing. Tried out a couple of ads, etc. But within contained, to see if it works. don't invest in, I think this actually came up, is don't invest a whole bunch of money in marketing until you know it works.
Mhm.
Right? Because again, the nature of our work is such that it's different from selling stuff on Amazon, right? So that is one of the things that have come up. Having said that, that's not to say that the reactive stuff doesn't work, right? So it's funny because just last week, one of the biggest questions we have is like, well, you know, what do we do with our websites on? You know, do you need a website? Do you, you know, if so, what should it look like? Blah, blah, blah. And that, you know, of course, it's going to depend on the type of business. And so my, you know, sort of personal take on this was that, well, I'm never going to get a business from my website, and I'm not pushing, you know, I'm not expecting to get business from one website. Last week, I got my first inquiry through my website saying that I need help. And I'm like, whoa. So it does happen. Honestly, I have never heard within my circle of people that I work with, I've never heard that ever happened. So I was actually quite surprised, like, hey, somebody looked at my way. And I asked them this, I talked to them this morning, and he's like, well, I'm like, how did you find me? It's like, well, I Googled. What? But then he was very, very meticulous about what he was looking for. So he's like, I mean, so he went through like 13 pages of search results or whatever. So he was looking, but in the vast majority of cases, people are, you know, your potential clients are not Googling thinking, okay, statisticians, right? They're not Googling for statisticians. So just kind of keep that in mind before, you know, you invest a lot of money into marketing. You know, try out a few things, you know, see if it works. If it works, great, you know, and ramp up a little bit more. If it doesn't work, then, you know, you haven't lost a whole lot.
That makes me wonder, like, why aren't they Googling statistician? Or is it that when they Google statistician, they either find a big firm or they don't find what they're looking for? And is it and how has the local element changed? Is it still is it just no longer important to be local to the same city or the same region anymore as a statistician?
I'm going to let some other people chime in if they have an opinion or if they have thoughts. I'm going to stop talking now.
So this is Naomi. I'm not a consultant, but, you know, I just find this really interesting. My husband talks about it all the time because he's a legal, you know, he's got his own business. And when I was at FSU, somebody found me just from my university website, and I ended up getting, you know, a very lucrative like expert witness case. And for him, he's found like Google ads that are managed by an like marketing expert. It's very expensive, but like it gets results. And now he's drowning in clients. So I don't know if people who are consultants have worked with any of these, you know, professional marketers, because the sticker shock at the beginning seems like, wait, are you really spending like, you know, $10,000 a month or whatever, something crazy? But then like you get tons of clients and you make it, you know, it's totally worth every penny. So I'm just curious, have other people done that?
I can't speak for me. I've only used word of mouth, and that's been great for me. But I know two other people who've worked with marketing people in different ways. One has worked with like Google ads, like you were talking about, and she gets a ton of clients. She is very busy. But I'll say, looking at it from the outside, they're not clients I would want. So I also think some of it depends on who you want to work with, because those ads aren't going to be, I mean, I just think by definition, they're not going to be as targeted as when word of mouth is the way for doing it, because people are going to tell people in the same situation as them. And if you've worked with them before, it's going to be good. But yeah, I think it can be successful. But again, it's all about what do you want? What do you want it to be successful for? So then the other example, I know, I'm pretty sure she's not here, but Karen Grace Martin at The Analysis Factor, I think she's done some presentations at JSM and CSP, and she's awesome. She actually has like not a marketing department that works in her office, but it's like she contracts with some marketing people who market for her kind of internally. So she does have a very large email list that she's built up over the years. And she has this group of people that she works with to help craft these emails and help her get the message across that she wants to. So it's not the same thing as just randomly advertising all over the internet. So it's already slightly targeted because of what she's built up. But I think that's also been very successful for her. And it's the same thing we were talking about earlier. If that's not my expertise. That's part of why I don't advertise, is I personally hate the idea. But like, if you work with somebody who's going to be doing that for you, and that's what they love to do, then they can really help you craft your message that is already targeted to certain people. And again, I think that's been very successful for her. She offers a lot of workshops and things like that, and then she tends to get the right people enrolled in those workshops, I guess I'd say. So
that's good. Yeah, I know my husband talks with his Google people, and it's always like very specific about which search terms you use and which ones you don't, so that you do filter out the bad clients and get where the good ones.
Yeah, then I think also depends on it's highly dependent on a type of work you're offering. So it's a type of work you're wanting to do. The type of the specific niche. If you have a specific niche of the service or the area or type of whatever, I think that may or may not work. Depends on how general how generally applicable your services are with respect to the available market. There's this term that I use quite a bit with other people, but it's addressable market. How big is your addressable market? And sort of depends on how can you reach it through. Can you reach your all addressable market through these other marketing means? And so it sort of depends on whether that's worth it or not. And to our point from the very beginning is it sort of it's going to vary from practice to practice, and it's a combination of a lot of different things. But absolutely, yeah, it's something you want to consider. Just our point was that don't spend too much money until that that it's going to be worth it. I thought I saw a hand somewhere. Deborah.
Mute.
There we go.
Here, I'll start my video. Am I up there? Or
I see your hand. I hear you.
okay, I have my video off, or on. But anyway, I was interested in the comment. Who made it? Who had just made it about the how local versus not local. Because I have a pretty niche business where it just grew word of mouth, which maybe that makes it niche. I do consulting in veterinary medicine, and I've done that for 15 years, and it grew word of mouth. So that's a very non-local. I mean, there aren't enough veterinarians in Athens, Georgia, where I live, to support that business. So I've found that no problem. But actually, through COVID, it's been interesting. My clients at University of Georgia, where I started, that was all in person. It was just 2 days a month where I came in and was available. But now through COVID, then I was virtual for that. And now it seems like that's going to continue. I mean, I think people actually that are located here in Athens prefer, for flexibility, to have the virtual option, because it's not been limited to exactly when I can be in the building. So that's been an interesting effect of COVID, I guess. So I think it is still better. I prefer, there is definitely value. I definitely, a little bit, I'm sad because that was a minority of my business that was in person. And I'm like, oh, I like actually meeting with people in person some, but you can pretty effectively do statistics not in person. Even like the screen sharing, like now that I meet in person and they're sort of awkwardly trying to turn their laptop around across the table without, obviously with COVID, there's more distance than if they were sitting right next to you. But anyway, it's been like, I realized like, oh, if we were screen sharing, then I could see that really close. So there's, yeah, anyway, that's an interesting question. I feel like I work with people all over the place, it's not geographically limited.
So anybody still continue to work primarily locally? Or the other end of it is anybody who works exclusively non-locally?
I'm not a consultant, but I've worked with people non-locally for years. I mean, I had a collaborator that I met in 2014. We started working in 2015, and in 2016, she moved to California, and we still work on papers together. And like, you know, back the beginning, it was Skype. Now it's generally Zoom or Teams or whatever. But I think that, as I typed in the chat, like for our job, I think it actually, in my case, I feel like I do my job better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you first meet people, maybe it's worth like getting together to kind of establish rapport. But if you're going over results, I really feel like sometimes it's better. I mean, either everybody needs paper and then you have to say, well, I'm on page this paragraph, or I mean, yeah, I just think it's much easier to make sure everybody's looking at the same thing, even if you're literally in the same like building.
Anybody else on the remote versus local?
Yeah, I mean, I'll comment. Most of the folks that I work with are remote. Just a small portion is local, but I do find the local really nice in the sense that you can go and meet with the individuals for you know, for dinner or for coffee or something like that, and I don't necessarily think that's needed for business or for you know, necessarily for spreading the word of mouth, but it's just fun to have that kind of engagement with the individuals who you're working hard to help them out.
And so that's like kind of the relationship aspect, right? Yeah, we're providing a service and we're, you know, it's business, but you can build a better relationship if you're there in person, one way or the other, be it. And so because I'll chime in a little bit. I have never had a local client ever. And so, so I mean, I lived in Atlanta, and right now I live, you know, outside of Tampa, but I have never had a client in either of those cities. And when I, you know, lived in respective cities. And so, so in a sense, like, you know, everything I've done is remote, but I've gone to, I think I've done like 1 or 2 projects where I had never saw the client in person, project or engagement, let's say, where I never saw the client in person. That's just because again, the whole relationship aspect is so important. And if it's not just about this project, right? It's also about the next project. So then the one of the things that to also piggyback on one of the earlier questions, you know, how managing the ebbs and flows and everything, you know, everything, whatever project you're doing right now, in a sense, is also a lead into the next project, right? It may not be right after, but it's future, some projects in the future. And so how do you kind of make sure that you're developing that relationship? And I think, you know, whether they're local or not local, if you can see them in person, great. If you can't then, you know, some other way to develop that relationship.
And that kind of brings up a point about, it may not just be about developing the relationship, but also about getting a knowledge of that person and who they're talking to, and what what other problems they have, or what other problems these other people may have, what what venues they're going to. Possibly just the aspect of asking them those questions might make them think, oh, well, oh yeah, there is this other project or problem, and if you start to express interest in it, maybe, I don't know, maybe that would lead to aspects of work.
Because best marketers, you're your happy client, right?
Yep.
So if they can, somehow sort of become your, the marketing outlet, then, that's sort of how you get your next sort of the referrals or whatever. And so there's that. There is the relationship, getting the trust of that person, whatever, understanding their sort of the whole situation, and there's so many other things that I could just kind of fan out into, but it's not, we're not in a transactional business, right? We're not, we don't, sort of do, a task and then, sort of move on in some sense. And at least not in an ideal world anyways, we sort of have, projects that are coming in, but then they're not being turned over because, it's in a very finite sort of sense. So, I mean, as much as we deal with data, I mean, we are still, this is still a bit of a people business. And then there was a comment. Yeah, perspective analysts we may supervise, trying to recruit or retain people to be in person. Yeah, it could be, I mean, after the pandemic, yeah, probably can be tough.
I talked to somebody yesterday who, I work with lots of different PIs. I'm in academia. And one of them said, I really need a statistical analyst, but HR won't let them be remote. And I was like, well, good luck, because we've lost actually 3 people since April.
Yeah, and from a consulting perspective, that is something for us to think about, right? So one of the things that we address in the guidebook is whether you should, how if you need a bigger team, how do you engage these people, right? There's a section on HR-ish, topics, but whenever you engage another person, if you engage in a as a team, or if you engage as a prime versus subcontractor versus there's going to be kind of an HR-ish things that you have to deal with, whether you go, do you hire these people, do you subcontract out, and then they both have pros and cons, and then associated sort of other things, like even legal things that come around with it, because there are legal requirements for hiring, certain legal requirements when you hire people as W-2s, and so there's a lot of things, right? I mean, if you're in a situation where you want hands, not just your own, but then other people's hands to work on certain projects, and that's absolutely a consideration.
I think an interesting topic related to that is decision making around kind of what your plan is for the business, whether you want to grow it or not. Like, what are the advantages of staying small and staying as the only person in your consulting business versus the advantages of deciding to grow things? And kind of when I think about that, I think, advantage of staying small is you can keep your own schedule. You don't have, you can try to maximize your time on things that you like to do, etc. Growing large, you have potential for higher impact, and you're possibly working closely with people in statistics and whatnot. Does anybody else have thoughts on that?
is there anybody here who runs a consulting practice business with employees?
Yeah, they're too busy managing their.
Yeah, they're too busy. Here's that, right? Because then once you do that, then you have to manage people, right? So the funny kind of flip side of that, right? So, and I can offer my own perspective. I'm trying not to talk too much because there's so many other people here who can like share. But you know, I've made a conscious decision not to grow, well, not to expand my business. So growth is different from like, you know, making it, you know, larger, right? Yeah. So. But I've made a conscious decision not to do that. I've been there, I've seen it. I've been in large corporate scenarios where I had to manage a lot of people. Been there, done that, not interested. Mm-hmm. So I've made a conscious decision to say, hey, I'm just going to stay myself and I'm going to do what I want. Yeah. Right. So that was my personal, it was a personal decision, right? But then, so it sort of depends on what it is that you want. Why are you doing this? And a lot of this kind of comes back to the some of the earlier parts of the guidebook. Reason for being. Why are you doing it? Right. And there are some things that I think you want to consider. Let's see if I can actually get. Oh, I need to go to a different page to do that. But you know, first of all, what do you mean by consulting? Why do you want to get into consulting on your own versus, you know, somewhere else? And so then it's kind of, you know, stems from that, right? And then it kind of get into, okay, here are all the things that are involved in actually managing a larger practice. Here are the, you know, here's what, you know, here's the pros and cons, and it's just weighing out the pros and cons and whether that aligns with what you want.
So, I feel like I keep saying I don't do this, but I know somebody who does. And I know that's the most obnoxious kind of discussion to add. But I know one person who did have employees and later made the decision to not have those employees anymore because it does add a whole lot of things you need to manage. The thing that keeps stopping me from doing it every time I think, oh, maybe, then I think, now I'm responsible for their life in some way. And that really makes me nervous. I think some people do pretty well with that. I also, again, I'm going to bring up my example of Karen, Karen Grace Martin again. She has a couple of people who I think are legitimate employees of the business. And then she contracts with a lot of people to do, like, she contracts with me and I offer workshops for her. So it's different from having an employee. You're not as responsible for them. It does add a lot more things you have to manage. And I think what I want to tie into this is I have a retirement company I work with to help manage my money. For some reason, they want me to earn more money. I really don't, but I do think that if you ever want to grow your business to the point where you can bring in a lot of money, you probably do need to have employees and people who can take things off your plate. I think the reason I bring up my retirement person is because what he told me was, if you want to grow your business like that, the key is to only do the things that only you can do. So I always worry that if I had more employees that I would end up spending a lot of my time managing my employees. The key would probably be to get someone to do my HR stuff for me. And, you know, so I don't end up spending my time on that. And if you're good at it, which I think Karen is, then you end up giving yourself more time to do the things that you are good at and that you want to do. So potentially, like, say I only like the actual running programs and writing reports for people, and I don't like doing some of the other stuff. If I were to hire employees and someone to manage them, then potentially I could make more room for myself to do that. But I know myself, I don't think I'd be good at that. That's why I haven't done it. But I just thought I'd give that perspective, if that helps.
Ben, you have a hand up.
If I can see if I can turn on my video. Not that you guys really want to see me, but
There you go.
so I started consulting 20 some odd years ago, and I was initially doing a lot of kind of biggish engineering problems with some big data and simulations and control systems. And I ended up with projects that were just too big for me to do by myself and had to have employees. And I can tell you, number one, hiring people is by far the hardest thing to do. For at least it was for me. Raising money and doing the work was easy compared to hiring people. Getting good people is really tough. And the other thing is you have to do all this HR stuff. You have to have payroll, you have to have payroll taxes and all that business. And that takes time. You do in some sense get some more leverage and make some more money because you're basically charging people for the hours of all these other folks that are working too. And over the past couple of 3 years, I've started to scale back some just because I was more interested in doing the technical work than trying to manage employees.
Thank you for those of you who was wondering, what is she doing with going back and forth. There is a section in human resources that sort of talks a little bit to what some of the considerations are. Again, this is not by any means comprehensive, but there is a if the question is you need more hands, then there are ways to contract people out. If you need more steady hands, then and control over those hands, then you got ways to bring those people in as employees, and there's going to be pros and cons that you're going to want to think through. You can grow either way. You can get bigger either way. I mean, there are companies that have like they're run by a few people, but then so everybody else is a contractor, like literally 1,000 contractors. That's large. It's just one employee, but that's a business decision that you will make. Somebody's going to have to manage some of these things and so forth, and it's like I said, it's just a decision you will make whether it makes sense for you. Anybody else want to? Who else wants to chime in? I was hoping that the one of the Alicia, I think, has a practice that is that has, I think, employees, and I was hoping she would kind of. I didn't think she would make it here, and I don't believe she is, but there are, I mean, it's been known to happen. People do, hire other people as full-time employees. So yeah, Irina just posted the link to a YouTube where she was on the panel. It's in the chat for those of y'all who are keeping an eye on it at all. But there's a YouTube where she was on the panel, and two of the other panelists were running consulting practices, and they shared their pain points. That could be interesting. So that's a good resource. I mean, the bottom line is you're going to have pain points one way or the other, right? It's like there's not a pain-free world in some sense. I mean, there's going to be pain somewhere, but which pains are you going to are you going to accept, and which pains are you willing to accept? I guess that's the decision we have to each have to make with respect to our preferences and what we do and so forth. And Irina, please do feel free to speak up. What other questions? Or what other sort of thoughts?
Well, I think another option instead of hiring employees is to go into business with another consultant. And I've talked to some folks about that, and I mean, I think it depends on who you talk to, but there were a couple of folks that recommended strongly not to do that. And I think in some ways it does come down to how you value different aspects of the business. How do you value the relationships that people come in, that people bring in to the equation? How do you value the actual how do you value the development of a project and the creation of a statistical plan or a statement of work? And how do you value the continual relationship management and work on the analysis? And I think, I guess my sense is that if you want to go into business with somebody else, that could reduce some of the overall work that you have to do on the admin side, and increase your ability to kind of maintain a steady flow of contracts if the other person is also doing half of that work. But you've got to have some real clarity on the value of the different things that both people bring to the table and how that's going to be divided and what happens if there's conflict. So.
Yeah, I mean, not only are you going to need an agreement with your client, but you also need an agreement with the other business. I mean, that would be, unless you're independent, you're saying that you're independently responsible for your relationship with the client. So that's another layer. I mean, and it also depends on what, to your point, what value does the other firm, let's say, bring to, to the table. I mean, it's a lot, there are joint.
Sorry, I was thinking more about like having a partnership within a business. So creating an LLC with two people as.
Oh, that partnership. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would. Yeah, that's a legal, it's a question. We're not touching that one. It depends. It all depends. Sorry about that. Colleen, you have your hand up. Please speak up.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Sure. And thanks again to you and the team for putting this together. It's awesome. A question about communication, managing communication, the frequency, just setting expectations for how often to interact with the client. And of course, this is going to depend on the deadlines and timelines, but I just would be really interested in people's thoughts about how that expectations are set.
I know there are people around who have a lot to say about this. I'm going to let other people speak. I'm going to shut up.
Well, yeah, if you don't interact frequently with the client, you run the risk of them, A, thinking that you're not doing any work, B, diverging in like, there's a difference in becomes a difference in expectations of, oh, this was the priority I thought, but you go off on a complete tangent and work on priorities that really aren't, from the client's perspective, all that important. So I would say it probably is going to depend on the project itself and the project timeline, but I would try to keep in touch every 2 weeks. And for active large projects, you might even want to go weekly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts around that? Ben.
I've found that for the most part, my clients have driven communication frequency rates. Often at the onset, we'll lay out a plan for, what the touch points have to be based on deadlines and things. And it can be a little bit of a challenge to sort of maintain your life when you have clients that are really kind of high frequency demanding. But I've often let them drive it to some extent, and I've found that generally works reasonably well.
So are you answering the phone on the weekends and at night, or how, is that something that you can set a boundary and people respect that?
I will respond to email over the weekend sometimes, but yeah, I do. I don't answer the phone over the weekend, and I do sort of say that up front that I generally reserve the weekends for my own stuff. And occasionally there'll be some huge deadline pressure that I have to work on the weekend to resolve something, but for the most part I try to preserve that, and I haven't really had any problems with clients not respecting it.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's just, you set the expectations. It's sort of what the same question you asked, but you set the expectations, right? And then, if that expectation's not, that's not on the same page, and you work it out. And then, as Ben said, set it up front, right? As opposed to don't wait until you actually need it, right? Set it up front, so that is clear from the very get-go. Because a lot of the, things, when it goes sideways is like when you actually run into something, and then when you actually have to deal with it right on the spot, and then you find out that you're not on the same page. And whether, and also obviously, depends on whether you're willing to do things, whether what your lifestyle in some sense, right, is, and when it comes to work. And, some are willing to do things, and do some things on weekends, and some are not. And so that, you'd have to kind of determine that, and then sort of communicate that to the client, and then, make sure that you're on the same page before you go too far. Anybody else got anything else to chime in here? Okay, here is like a question that's in the chat. A couple of questions on rates. Is it advisable to charge a fixed rate for every client, or is it good to have different rates for different clients depending on the projects? And I'm going to assume that this is probably referring more to hourly rate than fixed, the project-based pricing, because obviously project-based pricing will be based on the project. Particularly if for those of you guys who charge primarily by hour, how do y'all do it? Oh, Colleen, you have a hand up?
Sorry, I did not intend to raise my hand.
Okay. Oh, Lord, there we go. Anybody who they typically charge by hour, what y'all thoughts?
I can talk about that a little bit. I feel like I'm also talking too much, but so I charge hourly. I charge different depending on the client. It's not, well, I was gonna say it's not necessarily that the work I do for the client is worse or better. although sometimes it is, but I charge if you are a student or a professor and you're doing this for research, I charge my lowest rates for that. Part of that is there's more of an expectation that I'll benefit from authorship in some of those cases. Although you don't have to set your rates on whether you're going to be an author or not. I want to be totally clear. I just do that because I do find it to be a benefit for me. Part of it is because they can't afford the same rates that like a corporate person can afford. And I want to continue to work with them. Like I value being able to work with them. I enjoy it. And so I set my rates lower so they can afford it. My rates for like flat out corporate stuff, like a company is paying me, are at least double my academic rate. And then there are in between situations where maybe like a person who works for a company and is technically being paid because of what I'm helping them with, but they're really more interested in learning, and you know, it's somewhere in between. Same thing with government contracts. Same thing with nonprofit organizations. That's all somewhere in between. And again, I kind of set those rates based on how much I want to do the work. I really prefer working with academic people. I fit in better there because that's my background. I also find that corporate work has more demanding deadlines and more changes and more things that are more complicated for me to deal with. So I charge for that. Yeah, I don't know. Is there any more details on any of that that would be useful to anyone? Okay. Oh, and I'll also say I put my academic rates on my webpage because I want those people to know what to expect when they work with me. I sort of have a pipeline and I explain all of it for them. People who want me to do for corporate work and other things, I usually just say contact me for my rates.
Thanks, Kim. Anybody else who charge hourly rates? Maybe not all the time, but at least some of the time. And how do y'all determine your rate in terms of are they all the same or is it different? So Allison says I charge by the hour and also have different rates. So at least a couple of input saying that they are not always the same. Anybody else?
I think one other, not only how much do you want to work on the project, but also how much work they're willing to provide is another factor in determining your hourly rate. Say if this client is going to provide work that's enough to keep you busy full time for a full year, and you charge your hourly rate, and say your hourly rate is $180 an hour, that's going to rack up an enormous bill very fast. And you may be incentivized to say, well, we need to make this total amount reasonable over the course of a year. So I think the number of projects that you have and the size of the project is going to, in part, dictate how much time you spend on billable hours versus unbillable hours.
Irina, you have your hands up.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I do charge hourly. I also have set rates. They are actually publicly available on my website. And then I do a combination of what Kim and Clark mentioned. So to Clark's point, I'll give discount based on about the time commitment or number of hours per week the company will want to work with me. So there's a top rate for ad hoc, no minimum. There's a discount if we want to work for up to 5 hours a week, then 5 to 10, and then up to 20. So kind of tier discounts. And then because a lot of my clients are startups, I will actually offer half of my hourly rate as equity. And it does also vest hourly. So I will get paid then, part will be cash and part of it will be equity. So it's very, very tailored, very, very flexible. And so just wanted to share that. So hopefully that helps.
That's great. Thanks for the Thanks for the different perspective. This is why we all here, right? And Allison also mentioned that the industry makes money off of the work, where academia is different. And I do tend to agree that there's residual sort of benefit value that we're providing if we're doing for industry. Obafemi, I know you've been dying to ask a question. Please do. Obafemi? Hello? We cannot hear you. Obafemi, can you speak up? You know, he had typed in some question before. I'm going to try to find. Obafemi? Maybe not. You want to launch your own consulting outfit, and there's want to know how best you can achieve this now. It's I'm trying to get him to come on to sort of expand on that. Oh, it's feminine. Can't come up with it.
Sounds like he's having trouble with his
yeah.
microphone.
Yeah. In the meanwhile, if you can elaborate on your question, like a specific question, that'll be great. Let's see, we are at 1:24 at this point. Yes.
I had a,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I had a question kind of related to billing, billable versus non-billable hours. So I work at a national laboratory, so I work on a lot of different projects, and sometimes that involves learning a lot about a subject area that I've never, that I know nothing about, like graphite is one. And so, you know, when thinking about entering like a private practice, how and potentially being in the same situation, but not being in a setting where you can, I guess I'm not sure what the standard is on how much time you can spend learning about a subject, your area you're unfamiliar with, and bill that time versus how much is expected to be kind of done on your own time, I guess. Because it's not labor, you know, if you talk about the labor versus not labor, you're not performing a statistical analysis while you're learning about the subject area, but you need to know a certain amount about the subject area to do the analysis.
I'll give a quick answer of my thoughts to that. I would say that if you can attribute the learning of this particular area directly to, you know, as a need for the particular project, like if I need to move forward with this project, but I have a gap and I need to learn this area, I can say that this is directly applicable, then I would charge that as billable hours. On the other hand, if it's not something that I can directly say, well, this is a bottleneck, this needs to be learned or understood beforehand, then I guess I would be less inclined to charge that as billable hours. But not necessarily that I wouldn't, but it would be, you know, key projects where everybody's okay with that. There's lots of money. They're okay with, you know, you kind of going off and learning things that'll likely be helpful, but not necessarily.
Yes.
I have charged for some learning background on a project. I think I've tried to limit that, but I haven't really told them, the client, that, but I have done that, charge them for a certain amount of background reading. And I think I would agree with what the previous speaker just said.
I would say that it probably depends. This is my chiming in, this is my hat. I'd say that it would depend on, what is the client expectation, right? Does the client expect you to know this thing, or does the client expect you to, is the client okay with you not knowing it and picking up the time to, so some of it I think can be handled upfront. Other times, maybe not. And of course depends on what value this is to the project. Again, is it a bottleneck, as Clark said, or Allison said, is it a bottleneck? Then yeah, I mean it's, but it makes sure that, I'd say, that makes sure that the client is sort of, we know what the client expectation is, I would say. Naomi, I know you wanted to say, you had something to say on this as well, and you have a question.
Yeah, just really quickly, Moffitt is very, business-like, so I've learned a lot about that here. And our analysts charge hourly for all of their work. So like if I'm supervising a master's person who's doing all the coding and I come up with the planning, they charge for all of their time. So I had somebody run like a zero inflated negative binomial model. They'd never done it, but they only needed to learn it for this project and other future projects that would be in the core. So our core bills half. They say half of that is because of the project and half of that is benefiting the core for future. So they do half, which I think is interesting. And then again, that's just for analysts because faculty are not billing hourly. But if I were asked to do something that I know is going to take a lot of time and that would require my learning time, hopefully it's for a grant. And I would say, well, 5% is not enough. Maybe even 10% is not enough. Maybe I need 15, maybe I need 20, so that I know that we've budgeted for that. That's my personal thought on, it should, if it's for that grant, I think they need to pay for it in some way. Now, I had a question. I was wondering if anybody, from what I understand, being a consultant, often you work with either corporate clients, government clients, expert witness stuff. And I know Kim works with academics, but I'm wondering, does anybody work with, say, academics on like NIH grants or something like that, but on like a, I guess you could do it on an hourly basis, but generally that's like % effort. So almost like you're a private person rather than based at a university, but your services are to, contribute to the project in the same way. Does anybody do that, or is that not something anybody does?
I think I understand your question. I'm in the process of that. So most of my clients are academic, and depending on, so I've one client that's from another university, and it's kind of, the work that I'm doing and the billing is relatively very similar to what I was doing as an academic. It's just more complicated because I have to decide for each particular person, do I bill them as with a contract, or do I work with them as an affiliate? So it's kind of, I'm still in the process of figuring some of that out, but.
Ben, you had a hand up.
Sure. I've done this a few times with clients that were either academics or startup companies doing, small business type research. And generally I have to spend some time talking to them in the proposal stage. So it goes in as a subcontract to the company. And then this creates some challenges to sort of demonstrating hourly rates and administrative costs and whatnot. But and this is usually a place where I would sort of reduce my hourly rate for a number of reasons, not the least of which is NIH has caps on these things. But this is totally doable. It just requires a pretty careful scope of work.
Excellent. So we are at the bottom of the hour. Well, right? Yeah, 1:30. So at this kind of closing time. Any final parting shots? And I'll leave. Where did you go? Oh, there you are. I'll leave Andrea to give some parting shots, but before that, do we have a penultimate parting shots from somebody? Anybody?
No, just thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. This is, I thought was, I hope it was informative and, you know, useful. Andrea, you want to just close this, if you would, please?
Yeah, yeah, thanks again, Michiko, for leading this and for the team for creating the guidebook. I just wanted to let everyone know that there will be an October webinar coming up on developing your first promotion packet as an academic collaborative statistician. So look for more information on that coming out in the ASA section communication email. So thanks for everyone for attending and participating, and we'll see you soon. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.